Hey friends! Hey, I cannot believe that it is already May. So today we are going to be doing my April wrap up for all of the books that I read in April, kind of just giving a little general update as to what's been going on behind the scenes and maybe what is on the horizon for the month of May. Let's jump into it. So when I did my wrap up for March, I had kind of mentioned that I had already finished the first book of April, and that was Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. This is an independently published Romantasy series. I read the first book. I thought it was all right. It didn't compel me enough to want to keep going with the series, but I know that a lot of people have really found a good footing with this series. The basic premise storyline is that there is a girl named Diem. She is a healer in a world where there are these blessed type figures that have magic, and then there are the pleb humans like Diem, and she's kind of brought into that world, and it becomes very convoluted and murky, and there's a rebellion because there's always a rebellion. So that was the first book that I finished for the month of April. It was an enjoyable read. I'm not itching to get back to that series. Maybe at some point in the future I will, but that was how my month started. Book 2 of the month was perfection. I don't even know what else to say about this book other than the fact that I absolutely adored it. My girl Esme once again came through with this recommendation for me, and that book is Butcher and Blackbird. I love this book. Brynn Weaver is absolutely hysterical just from the trigger warnings page alone. This page had me cackling. This is a horror romance, and that is not necessarily something that I ever thought would go together, but it worked so well. If you are familiar with the show Dexter and the concept of a serial killer hunting down and killing other serial killers, this is a story that is very reminiscent of that, where our two main characters, which are Sloane and Rowan, it is a dual POV book, which I actually really enjoyed, are both serial killers that hunt down bad people that are serial killers. And of course, a romance blossoms in and amongst this story, but it was so funny. I really loved everything about this book. It had all of the typical things that I want from a romance, in that it had good banter, good humor, they had great chemistry. The sexual writing in the book was really good. I thought that Brynn just knocked this out of the park. It is going to be part of a trilogy, I believe, called the Ruinous Love Trilogy, even though each book is kind of a standalone within this trilogy, and the next one comes out in June, so next month. So that will definitely be something that I read next month. And I believe the next one is called Leather and Lark. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's what the title is called. But if you are curious about trying out a romance and you want one that is really kind of off the wall, highly recommend Butcher and Blackbird. Okay, so the next 4 books I read were part of this series, and I want to preface this by saying these books are absolutely unhinged, and I'm not really sure why I continued to read them other than the fact that I wanted to see what happened, and I'm not even sure why I felt that way. But that series was the Vicious Lost Boys series. First book of that being The Never King. This is a Peter Pan retelling where Peter Pan is a very attractive 20-something-year-old. That's what he looks like, even though he's an immortal being, and he has lost something and he needs to find it, and the only person that could help him find it is someone from the Darling lineage. And whenever a Darling turns 18, they are brought to Neverland. It's almost always exclusively females though, so there's that to note. And things get wildly unhinged from there. It is a reverse harem story, and if you are not familiar with the term reverse harem, it is where there is one female and multiple male character love interests, or just multiple love interests in general. So Winnie is the main female POV in this story, and then there are 4 male POVs in this story. It is really just, I feel like, Peter Pan porn. But when you finally get to book 3, you get a bit more of a plot because they start introducing other characters from the Peter Pan lore, like Tink and Hook and the crocodile. So do I recommend this series? No. If you are looking for something completely unhinged that is absolute brain candy, Yes. Do I think it is a good series? I don't know. Kind of up to you to decide, but really, unhinged. That's all I have to say about those books. The next book I read was actually a YA book, and I haven't read YA in a really long time, and I ended up reading a few YA novels this month. It really was a mixed bag for me in terms of all the things that I read, and this book is called Where the Dark Stands Still, and that is by A.B. Poranak. And I really I gravitated towards this book initially because of the cover. The cover is so beautiful. I just loved it. And when I read that it was a mythological, folklorish book, I was like, well, I'm there. And when I found out that it was Polish folklore on top of it, I felt exceptionally compelled to read it because I am a person of Polish heritage. So I actually have worn the dress that she is wearing on the cover of that book. I wore one as a kid to a Heritage Day, so I felt like I really needed to read this book. I ended up really enjoying this in the sense of it being what it is. It is a YA story, so the female character at sometimes could be a little irritating. However, the world that is established around her I thought was very interesting. The magic was minor but still important. What was really the driving force of the story I felt like was how our main POV has to deal with the fact of overcoming religious stigma in the village that she's grown up with. Even though this is a world that has magic, mysticism, folklore, it is very much rooted in Catholicism, which Poland is. It's a heavily Catholic country, and it tends to often lean into conservatism. So I felt like that was something that the author handled very delicately, very nicely, and it is a story about basically coming of age, accepting yourself for who you are, and not having to accept the attributes and characteristics that other people have ascribed to you, and that knowing that you yourself are your own person. So in terms of a great YA story, I do feel like this hits the mark. I found that the ending was very successful, and that it probably ebbed this up a whole star for me in terms of where the book was going. So I was really happy that I powered through to the end. If you're looking for a YA story that's a bit different but still kind of hits upon those notes, Where the Dark Stands Still would probably be a very good option for you. After having my very innocent YA read, I thought, you know what I need? I need Sarah J. Maas again. So I went back and I reread A Court of Silver Flame, which is the 5th book in the ACOTAR series. I love this book. It really is, it's probably my second favorite book of the series, if not tied with my other favorite book of the series, which is A Court of Mist and Fury. I love the themes that Sarah J. Maas delves into in this book. It is heavily focused on dealing with trauma, sexual assault, understanding that dealing with hating yourself and being angry with yourself. And I just think that Maas really is so skillful at tackling difficult topics, subject matter, themes, and doing it in a way that is approachable and accessible to a variety of readers. I love this series. It's not a surprise. I've been talking about it endlessly since February. I'm probably going to reread them again by the end of the year. Not a surprise there. But then I kind of did a 180 in terms of where I went for the month, and I decided that it was time to return to my main squeeze, Mr. Joe Abercrombie, and I finished Red Country. Now, Red Country is the third and final standalone in the standalones in the First Law universe. This is a book that I started in February. I got about 24% of the way through, and it wasn't the right time for me to read that book. I just wasn't in the right headspace. And the setting for this is a Western, which I've come to realize for myself is not a setting that I enjoy, despite the fact that Kyle from Read by Kyle is insisting that I give other Westerns a try, specifically Cormac McCarthy. I really don't like a Western setting. So for me, it was a trusting the process and trusting Joe to lead me on what I knew would be a great adventure and a great story in and amongst a setting that I really don't enjoy. I found that to be a little bit cumbersome at times, where I found that we were meandering at different points of the story, but I knew there were going to be notes that we were going to hit, and boy did we ever. This book, as always, had me laughing out loud. There is a particular character that has resurfaced in a lot of the books that is present in this book who is just so funny and I adore so very much. So I really appreciated that character arc. I love Joe Abercrombie's style of writing. No one does an inner monologue like him. No one does character work like him that I've experienced thus far. I know people love to rave about Robin Hobb. I just haven't read her work yet. But for me, the way that Abercrombie tackles humor, inner monologue, just characters and people as a whole and the journey that we as humans go on, I think is unparalleled. I think that this was a good example of how people don't necessarily change, even though their situation might have changed, their location could have changed, even though that they themselves have aged. People are who they are at their core, and I think that is the overall theme that Abercrombie hits in so many of his books, and it doesn't get old. It's one that I just really enjoy. I then jumped back into another Romantasy book. It is independently published. It's called The Veiled Kingdom by Holly Renee. I have seen a lot of people raving about this book. I struggled with this book quite a bit. I found that the relationship between the two love interests wasn't what it could have been. But I know that this is something that a lot of people have really liked online. So I'm not going to say too much about this book. I don't really like to drag on books that I don't really connect with. If you're looking for something rebellion-wise, again, that's kind of romantasy, like, it could be a good choice for you. I then read another YA book, and that was The Heartless Hunter by Kristen Ciccarelli. I am so sorry if I'm not saying that name correctly. I adored this book. YA, I don't know if YA has changed in the last few years, or maybe I was just in the right mood for it, but I feel like the options of what is being offered now for YA are so much stronger than they were a few years ago. I really, really loved this book. It had a total catch me if you can vibe to it, in that there is a girl and she is trying to evade the police. It is a witch and witch hunter type scenario. I just loved this story and was devastated when I got to the end of it that book 2 wasn't readily available. I think that's going to be coming out next year. This book is a duology series. It really hit all the right notes for me. It was the right level of magic. It was the right level of intrigue, mystery. I liked the relationships between the characters in these books. It is convoluted and murky and deep and engaging, and I just was not expecting this from a YA novel. It was something that I just loved. It blew me out of the water. It's definitely going to be one of my fonder books of the year, I feel like. At least it is at this point. So highly recommend if you're looking for just a fun, engaging read that won't take you very long. Heartless Hunter, otherwise also known as the Crimson Moth. It has 2 names depending on where you are in the world. It's so much fun. Hope you give it a look. I then went back to Joe Abercrombie and I read Sharp Ends, which is his anthology of short stories. I am not someone that typically loves short stories, so I will say that off the bat, I'm kind of starting at a lower starting point than maybe others would be, but I ended up really loving some of these stories. The very first story of the book being one where we have a young Glocta, and as you know, if you've been around for a while, Glocta is possibly my favorite character from literature of all time, so I loved getting that. And I found that all of the stories that had Javra and Chev were really engaging. I almost wish that they had been given their own book or maybe were incorporated into the other books, even though I liked the story arc that we were able to go on with them in Sharp Ends. The other 2 ones of note, there were Freedom and Made a Monster. I really enjoyed these stories. There were only a few that I didn't super love, or really just appreciate the background and context that it gave First Law as a whole. I just love Joe Abercrombie. I'm super excited to now be able to jump into Age of Madness because I've caught up. So that is something that I am super geared up and excited to do. Okay, the next 3 books were part of a series and I freaking ate it up. I loved it, and that was Red Rising. I had such a blast. I basically read these 3 books over the course of a weekend where I basically did a book a day because I just found myself so engrossed with the story. I had got my husband Red Rising for Christmas. I just got him book 1. He ended up really enjoying it. And I know from a lot of the talk on BookTube is that book one is not indicative of the rest of the series. And it was interesting because when my husband read it, he hasn't read Hunger Games himself, but he said to me, he goes, based on what I know of the Hunger Games, this really has a Hunger Games-ish vibe for book one. And I was kind of put off by that, just in the sense that Hunger Games is fine. It's just not a trope and idea that I super lean into. I read it when it came out years ago. I haven't felt compelled to go back and reread it, but I appreciated it for what it is. But I gave Red Rising a go, and the first third of the book I found was very YA, and I couldn't determine if that was because Darrow is young. He's 16 when the book starts, and I couldn't tell if it was just because our young protagonist is quite young, and that's why I felt it was YA, or it was more the subject matter was YA. But it really is not YA and does a big leap, I feel like, once you get into the second and final act of that book. I loved it. I really enjoyed the first book. Book two, I super enjoyed as well. But book three, this was a phenomenal read. It had pretty much everything I wanted going into it. From my understanding, Red Rising is going to be a 7-book series, the first part being a trilogy, the second part being a quartet. I loved the end of this trilogy. I will say that I personally found there were a lot of predictable things within the trilogy. It didn't bother me though. Like, it wasn't something that I was sitting there going, oh, I wish I wasn't able to figure that out. I feel like if you're really paying attention, the clues are there, but I could see people kind of skipping over it and not getting it. There was one thing that happened at the end of Morningstar that I am a little iffy on in general, but overall, that book had scenes that are going to be some of my favorites of literature for all time. I don't want to give any spoilers away. I'm debating doing a Red Rising video. Let me know if that's something that you'd be interested in, or if you are interested in knowing what those scenes were, you can shoot me a message because I am happy to talk about them because it was so good. The last 2 books that I read in April were books 1 and 2 of a series, and that is Once Upon a Broken Heart and The Ballad of Never After. Needed to check my notes to make sure that I got the names right, and that is by Stephanie Garber. This is once again a YA series. I found this to be really mid compared to what I had read from the Heartless Hunter, just because that has now kind of set the bar for me in terms of what YA can offer. I know that this is a beloved series on Book Talk, Bookstagram, and a lot of people on BookTube as well really love Stephanie Garber. I think the story is sweet for what it is. I ended up finishing the trilogy today, so the final book will be a book that I will talk about in my May wrap-up. But the baseline premise is that there is a female protagonist named Evangeline Fox. She is desperately in love with her first love, a boy named Luke, and she goes to a fate, aka Jax, the Prince of Hearts, to help win him back because of the fact that he has found himself engaged to somebody else. She ends up making a deal with the fate, and basically all hell breaks loose from there, and then it kind of becomes this tale of cautionary tales, fairy tales, along with fates kind of being interwoven over this 3-book series. It's fine. I see it being a really great series if you're maybe like 14, 15, but as I'm 34, maybe not the best audience for it. Still happy I read it though, just to kind of get a wider understanding of what's happening in YA right now and what has been for the last few years. So all in all, I'm pretty happy that I read it. Not going to reread it, but that's fine. In terms of things that have been going on behind the scenes in the month of May, I had a really fun live with my friend Caleb where we were talking about the first 3 books of First Law because he just finished reading them. He is actually now reading Best Served Cold, which I'm super excited about because once he gets through the standalones, I'm going to have him back on the channel and we will do another live wrap up for that. I ended up having a really great conversation on Do Unicorns Read channel about religion in literature, religion and fantasy, and kind of the state of religion and writing right now, and that was just super enjoyable. I had some really great people on there, some that I've spoken to before, like Philip Chase, and people who I hadn't spoken to before, like P.L. Stewart. Really just a really fun time. I enjoyed that so much. I have been a little absent in terms of doing my love bomb chats just because I've been spending a lot of my evenings editing the book that I wrote, and I managed to get through my 2nd draft of edits. I'm now in my 3rd draft. Let me know if there's anyone that you would really like to see on a love bomb chat. I'm looking to possibly get back into them in the next few weeks. But all in all, that's kind of what's been going on my end. It was a great reading month. I read in total 18 books, I want to say. Let me check my trusty notes here. 18 books. Had a really great reading month. I'm excited for what May is going to bring. I never commit to anything because I am a super mood reader unless I'm committing to a buddy read. But I am hoping this month to start Age of Madness. That's the big thing that I'm hoping to get to. And there's one that I'm debating starting, and I'm going to keep it a secret because I'm probably going to vlog about it if I decide to do it. But it's one that I've talked about doing for a while, and a lot of people have been telling me to read it. So we'll see what happens with that. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for stopping by and spending time with me. Please let me know in the comments down below what you read during the month of April. I hope that you had a wonderful reading month and what is on your horizon for the month of May. If you would like to follow me on Instagram, Goodreads, all that fun stuff, all the information is in the box down below. As always, I will see you next time. Bye.